els que esteu aquí, sembla que hi ha molt de trànsit interromput per la ciutat, però en fi, veig que n'hi ha uns quants que heu pogut arribar, i també saludo els que han pres la decisió d'escoltar-nos des de casa, perquè això s'està transmetent en híbrid. I bé, l'experiència és que, a més, les conferències que fem aquí continuen sent escoltades durant les següents setmanes i va augmentant. És interessant de veure com va augmentant el número d'oients amb els dies que van passant. Però avui és una sessió, jo diria, bastant especial per moltes coses, però, en fi, perquè presentem aquest llibre de la Sally Hayden, que ja coneixeu, perquè és per aquesta raó que heu vingut, que jo diria que és un testimoni impressionant. Jo vaig anar ahir a Madrid per una sèrie de qüestions que havia de tractar allí en diferents institucions i m'he passat unes quantes hores, per tant, a l'AVE, anant i venint, llegint-lo. I ara li deia a la Sally que realment m'he quedat molt impressionat per la vivesa que té el tractament dels temes, no només a nivell de llenguatge i de tècnica expositiva, diguem-ne, sinó sobretot pel que explica realment, no tant per la manera com ho explica, que és molt reeixida des del punt de vista d'un llenguatge molt directe, molt periodístic, sinó per haver agafat el fenomen migratori, jo diria, vist des dels ulls dels propis migrants, perquè normalment ho veiem des del nord de la Mediterrània, perquè és d'on estem, no? Però en canvi ella s'ha pres la molèstia vaja, no només la molèstia, sinó realment un esforç enorme en parlar amb ells, en buscar la informació on fos, moltes vegades dificultosament, perquè per la pròpia naturalesa del fenomen, per les condicions en què es troben els migrants, per aquestes rutes africanes, en el cas d'ella fonamentalment les que desemboquen a Líbia i els problemes infinits a Líbia en els camps en què es troben moltes vegades retinguts, tancats, maltractats, i més enllà inclús, i després els riscos de les travessies. I a més jo crec que perquè sobretot ens confronta, jo diria fonamentalment els europeus, a una contradicció greu i creixent entre valors que els europeus diuen o diem que volem representar, i en canvi les pors, les aprensions, els estereotips dels mateixos europeus contradictoris amb els valors que diuen defensar i que fa créixer aquesta contradicció que a més està, diguem-ne, tenint greus conseqüències, jo diria inclús, per la pròpia consistència dels nostres sistemes democràtics i dels nostres sistemes de valors democràtics. I jo crec que l'esforç que la Sally ha dedicat en això és incommensurable. Els que ho hàgiu llegit ja ho heu vist, els que ho llegireu realment hi ha un esforç. Jo ara li preguntava quant de temps havia tardat, però és difícil de dir perquè, clar, hi ha un temps dedicat específicament a preparar el volum, a escriure el que faltés, etc. Però, clar, això es basa en un treball previ de recopilació dels anys anteriors. Per tant, jo crec que, en fi, és un llibre important i per això ha rebut tot un seguit de premis, el Premi Orwell en el 22, el Premi Michael Deon i el Premi Post-Irish Book of the Year, considerat el millor llibre polític pel Financial Times el 2022 i considerat també el millor llibre d'història i política per The Guardian el 2022, no? I que ara l'editorial Capitán Swing ens l'ofereix en la traducció en castellà. Ara fa un moment la Sally em preguntava què m'havia semblat la traducció. Dic, bueno, jo ho he llegit amb molt de gust i amb molt creixent interès. És a dir, realment comences a llegir-ho i et corprèn i al mateix temps vas llegint amb creixent avidesa i interès perquè realment te'n dones compte que en aquestes pàgines hi bateguen històries increïbles de molta gent que realment ho ha passat molt malament. Aquesta és la conclusió. I que ens confronta, com deien els europeus, doncs, si és que això hi ha dret a què succeeixi, per dir-ho així. I per tant, vulguis que no, és també una requisitòria de per què això s'està consentint a la nostra societat, suposadament ben pensant, etc. Bé, la Sally Hayden, que avui està per tant aquí amb nosaltres i que ha publicat aquest llibre, ja ha dit els premis que ha rebut. Ella ha sigut periodista i ha fet reportatges pel New York Times, la BBC, per la CNN International, per Al Jazeera, per la revista Time, per l'Irish Times, etc. Ha sigut corresponsal a l'Àfrica, ha sigut professor a la University College del Dublin School of Law, etc. Jo crec que és per tant una experiència interessant. Tenim aquesta sessió d'avui, a més tenim la sort de tenir l'Anna Surinyach. L'Anna Surinyach és fonamentalment, a mi em diuen fotoperiodista, però fotoperiodista vol dir periodista.
Soc periodista primer,
després faig fotos. Una altra cosa és que ens expressem de totes les maneres que podem i si un sap fer bones fotos és lògic que ho aprofiti per transmetre i expressar les idees i les realitats que un vol fer arribar a un públic el més ampli possible. Per tant, tindrem aquí una primera part, que és la presentació del llibre amb la Sally Hayden, i després un diàleg entre la Sally Hayden i l'Anna Surinyach, animat pel nostre especialista en temes migratoris, que és el Xavier Aragall. Encara que aquesta casa, jo diria que des de l'origen, òbviament, està molt impregnada per aquest fenomen tan colpidor a la Mediterrània com és el fenomen migratori, i que també té aquestes contradiccions, que quan fem estudis de tipus econòmic veiem que és imprescindible que hi hagi més immigració a Europa, però després quan veiem què és el que passa a la Mediterrània veiem el drama que això representa i les conseqüències que té tant al nord com al sud de la Mediterrània. En tot cas, l'Anna Surinyach, com deia, periodista i fotoperiodista, especialista en migracions i drets humans, de la revista, com en dieu, 5W o 5W, i que també és professora a la Universitat Internacional de Catalunya i que ha treballat i documentat amb Metges Sense Fronteres i amb altres organitzacions i ha estat, això és com els antics corresponsals de guerra, perquè has estat a Síria, el Iemen, República Centreafricana, el Congo, etc., i amb els refugiats que travessen la Mediterrània. Bé, per tant, anem per la primera part. Sally, tu havies previst fer un llibre com aquest? Did you ever plan in advance of getting into this reality to do a book like that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and muchas gracias for having me here. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the attention on the book, and I'm very, very happy that it's now available in Spanish. And I'm sorry that I can't speak Spanish or Catalan. so you'll have to bear with me. There's translation, by the way, available if anyone needs the headsets. Yeah, did I ever think I'd write this book? No. I mean, I had an idea for a book that was like kind of more positive, and even before I started this reporting, I had become a bit like fed up of humanity in a way, just, you know, seeing reporting on, you know, I had reported on from lots of countries like Syria and like Iraq, and a bit on migration as well, and just was feeling a bit despondent. And I did an investigation into corruption in the UN Refugee Agency in Sudan in 2017 to 2018. And that had come about slightly accidentally, in that I was interviewing refugees about something else in Sudan, and they started telling me to report on that instead. And that investigation was how those refugees in Libya got my contact details, or they were advised to speak to me. But to be honest, at that time, I didn't want to do this type of reporting. It wasn't something that I was searching out, because I was finding it very difficult, and I was freelance as well. And freelancers, you know, it's always hard to get your stories published. And yeah, I basically got a Facebook message, and that's how the book opens. And that was August 2018. And it came from a guy who said that he was among hundreds of people. So the first message said, "Hi, Sister Sally, we need your help. We're under bad condition in Libya prison. If you have time, I'll tell you all the story." And I responded. I didn't really know, you know, could this be real? Who was this person messaging me? Like, it was almost coincidental that I saw it, because I didn't even check Facebook all the time, you know. And I responded and said, you know, I'm just a journalist. I can't really help, but like, tell me more if you want to. And what this man said was that he was with hundreds of people, that they had basically been abandoned because a war had started. They had been locked up already for months after trying to cross the sea to reach Europe, and that they had been left without food or water. There were women there were pregnant women there were children there. And so, of course, I kept responding. I said, you know, can this be real? Like, let me try and verify it. Send me GPS locations, send me photos, send me contacts for your family members, like anything I could think of. I started contacting NGOs. I started contacting the UN, saying, you know, this sounds strange, but I'm hearing from these people that say they're locked in this building in this area, and a war has broken out. And more it became clear that this was the reality, this was true. And that I was being contacted because the people that I was speaking to, they were like, we want the world to know that this has happened to us, and also we want help. And what happened for me, because I was freelance, like I said, and it takes time to place a story, once I had done my verification, I started posting screenshots of the messages I was receiving on Twitter. And that began, you know, as you say, it went viral. It became a thread that eventually was seen millions of times. And the result of that was not, as I thought, that help would come for this one group of people, but it was actually that more and more people in other detention centers found my name, found my contact details, and started messaging me too. And so the book, I wasn't trying to write a book. Honestly, even I was at one point asked by an agent, would I write a book about refugee issues about maybe 6 or 8 months into this reporting, and I said no, because all the time I was thinking the situation is going to improve and get better, and I didn't want to be doing this reporting. I was doing it because I felt like I had to, but like, it wasn't that I had decided that this was going to be my, you know, that this was my topic or anything. I just was propelled by being constantly like contacted by people who wanted these stories out there. And eventually, after about maybe a year, I realized at that point I had gathered so much information that I thought it should be available as evidence. But no, not at any time was. My goal wasn't to write the book, but eventually I decided that it was important because I knew nobody else had all the information I had. I wanted it to be a book, but I mean, I did actually, I'm glad that you say it's readable, because I did then have a conundrum of like, how readable should I make it? Because actually I wanted, for example, the detention centers to be named. I wanted it to be there to be documentation and evidence of what had happened in certain places. For example, I don't know this version, but in the English version, I think there are 54 pages of footnotes, because I wanted there to be like nobody to say, oh, is that really true? I wanted them to be able to see the source of each thing. And that was very important for me, but it meant that maybe it could have been more readable if I had sacrificed some of those things. Like one literary agent, for example, said I should basically, he was trying to get me to create a composite character of one refugee who went through everything and have like one detention center and no others. And I was like, but that's fiction, that's not, you know, that's not evidence-based, and I want to write a book of evidence, so.
See, I found that I was now checking whether the footnotes are there, but they are not at the end. They are at the bottom of each page. But that's one of the things that struck me, that everything you say is documented. And I guess it is because you found such an incredible stories that you need to show that they were real, not something that you were inventing for the sake of accusing anyone, but just that you found there and you had to present the proofs, the documents. And this is why, of course, it's full of footnotes stating where the information can be found in the networks, etc. No? And did you found special resistances for publishing it, or for what's the reaction of your interlocutors?
Do you mean the actual publishing industry?
Well, when they knew that you were a journalist about to write about this, maybe some people didn't like somebody to explain to the world what was going on, maybe under their responsibility, or because they're looking to another side, or.
Yeah, so I mean, most of this, a lot of the reporting I was doing as I went. So when I initially started reporting on what was happening in Libya, I reported pretty much for, certainly in English language, every media outlet you can probably think of, like BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, the Irish Times, The Guardian, The Telegraph, loads of, either I was interviewed by them or I did work for them at some point, most places you can imagine. So I was constantly actually reporting on this, but I think that did me some blowback. I think reporting in real, it was very strange actually, to be honest, because a lot of what I was doing was actually gathering information from people in detention and passing that on to people who worked for NGOs or the UN, or, you know, trying to get help that way first, because it was quite dangerous to go public. If you have a source in a detention center who has a hidden phone, you know, and you publish a report, there can be then a search for the phone. They can try and figure out who's the source. There can be like pressures put on people in the detention center to give each other up, you know. So normally I'd try and pass on the information privately, see did something happen, and then speak to my sources. And if they said, okay, we want to make this public, I'd do that. Or sometimes I'd post things on Twitter, and I became aware that like a lot of the aid agencies, for example, were following my tweets to try and figure out sometimes what was happening in different places they couldn't get access to. So that was kind of interesting. Or you might have a situation where, you know, that people at the top of the NGO, like the country directors or the high up managers, didn't fully know this, like their staff might not have been telling them the full story, and so they'd be following my reporting. So it became that I actually had a lot of sources also in different organizations and among diplomats and all sorts. But I think there was more blowback probably then. I think since the book has come out, to be honest, the reaction that I've received personally has been very positive, in terms of not people not being shocked, but people saying it's good that you wrote this. And that includes people who work for the EU, people who, you know, European diplomats, European officials, like various people in different positions of power, and in the UN as well, have said actually it's good that this information is public, because they're not happy with the way things have developed, and they don't feel comfortable being part of this system. And at the same stage, I think, like you said, it's a challenge on values, right? Like, how have we got to this point? There are really big questions to be asked there, and yet we're at a point where everybody feels like they can't do enough to change it, and that's what I hear again and again. And sorry, just to end, like, one thing, I used to think that it was that the people in power don't know this is happening, and more recently I've realized that they do know, but what they'll tell me is that they think this is what the European public want. And I think that the European public aren't actually aware of fully the consequences of the policies that we're bringing in. And that's potentially why they think that they want this. And yeah, I guess the aim of this book partially is to make people say, is this actually what we wanted?
Sí, perquè, a veure, perquè s'entengui el que estem dient, els que ja hàgiu llegit el llibre, doncs ja ho heu vist, i els que no, doncs ho veureu al llegir-ho. Realment és una requisitòria, una acusació, diguem-ne, moral extraordinària, perquè el que explica és extraordinàriament greu i no en som prou conscients, perquè els mitjans potser ho tracten una mica més vist des de lluny, però ella ha aconseguit veure-ho amb els ulls dels que estan a dins, en aquesta mena de camps, bueno, no en aquesta mena, no, en aquests camps de concentració, en el cas que ella tracta fonamentalment a Líbia, on són tancats pels suposats soldats o bé segrestadors o bé altra gent que intenta treure'n profit, que els segresta, per exemple, i els tortura perquè truquin a casa seva en el país d'origen, a l'Àfrica subsahariana, i els hi enviïn X diners perquè si no els mataran, i mentrestant els torturen i els maten, i això ho fan saber progressivament a la família perquè enviïn els diners. Això, diguem-ne, per ells del sud i per ells del nord, d'ofegar-se, i l'acusació que els mitjans europeus el que estan fent és per impedir que arribin, i que si envien mitjans aeris i tal és per detectar-los i comunicar-ho a les lanxes de vigilància líbies pagades pels europeus perquè els tornin a posar a Líbia i tornin altra vegada a caure en mans de les mateixes màfies i amb els mateixos maltractaments. Per tant, diguem-ne, és una requisitòria, com deia abans, d'una extraordinària potència, perquè està fet sobre testimonis reals, cada una de les ratlles que han escrites, i per això és molt important la referenciació de com, en quin instant, on es troba cada cosa, etc. Perquè, bueno... I tu penses que això està tenint algun efecte? És a dir, col·loques el públic europeu, i especialment en els polítics, per dir-ho així, europeus, davant d'unes responsabilitats de fer alguna cosa que no sigui simplement encarregar a aquests tercers, que són els estats del nord d'Àfrica, que ens facin la feina de rebutjar els immigrants. Està evolucionant d'una manera positiva o negativa en aquests moments la política real que està seguint la Unió Europea amb el nou pacte per la immigració, etc. Va en la bona direcció o persisteix en la mala direcció?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like this book specifically is about Libya and the Central Mediterranean route, what was known as the deadliest migration route in the world, also the most popular one to try and get to Europe. And people being intercepted now, I think nearly 130,000, I think I said that already, people have been intercepted and forced back to Libya. But it's also a small examination of a much broader issue, which is what the rich world is doing to keep the rest of the world out and to keep people off our territory. And I think abusive policies are certainly contagious, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, many deals are being entered into. I was in Tunisia in August, where another deal is being entered into with the EU, even though there's like an autocratic president, Kais Saied, and there's been a lot of criticism of that. Other deals with Egypt, with Morocco, I think with Mauritania. I haven't properly read the news, but I think that's the latest news related to Spain right now. We don't know. Some of these possibly won't develop quite as badly, but the issue is that I think huge amounts of money are being spent, and the money is actually, it will blow your mind if you hear the full amount, billions of euros being spent in ways aimed at stopping migration. And what my reporting would certainly show is that some of that is propping up dictatorships, warlords, militias, and systems that oppress people further. And one example of that is Sudan, where we saw the Rapid Support Forces, the former Janjaweed paramilitary group, are said to have been emboldened by EU anti-migration funding. And that was a big discussion when I was there in 2017. And more recently, we see that there are more questions to be asked as to the role that the EU trying to stop migration at any cost is playing in terms of destabilization. Because when I speak to European politicians, they're thinking about the next election. It tends to be shorter term. Particularly what they'll say is we want to keep the far right out of power. But if you're spending money in a way that's actually leading to longer term destabilization, that's of course problematic.
Bé, jo per acabar amb aquesta primera part així de tractar del llibre i abans del diàleg que establireu aquí, cada llibre tracta del que tracta i per tant no es pot demanar que cada llibre tracti de tot. I per tant una possible resposta al que ara diré, això va d'això, va de les condicions en què els pobres migrants que van sobretot en aquest cas per aquest canal central de la Mediterrània a través de Líbia. Però una possible crítica és que no es parla gaire del per què han de fugir dels seus països. És a dir, sembla que es diu una possible crítica aquí fora, però aquí els únics culpables són els europeus. I per què tenen de fugir dels seus països aquesta gent? Això no n'hem de parlar? Per tant, què diries en aquesta possible crítica?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I completely don't talk about it, because I do have kind of people that I follow from Eritrea, for example, which is a dictatorship, from Sierra Leone as well. A man that got to Libya that was then returned partially through my involvement to Sierra Leone. I actually went there myself and tracked him down and spent time with him. Some other people I do mention why they've left. There's a gay Somali young man who I interviewed as well, who I met in person later, and I detail his story. But the thing is, I was quite specific in my focus. I'm obviously a privileged white European. I'm not trying to tell the story of refugees or of a refugee, because, hopefully, they have and they can do that themselves. I saw my where I can add value as being looking at, my role as a European, basically. I'm a European. When I started this reporting, I realized that there was a specific thing happening as a result of our policies, and that was happening in my name. And that was what happens past these points of interception. And I started asking, I interviewed Frontex, the EU border agency, for example, and a spokesperson told me we're not responsible for what happens past that point of interception, because they go back to Libya. So it's only until that point that we're involved in terms of surveillance. And I thought, actually I need to document that. And one of the things that I've come across, in terms of even doing interviews, is people will say exactly this question: why do they leave? And I think some of this is, and this again isn't a criticism of you, it's just kind of, it becomes a simplification, because we've been using this word migrant or even the word refugee. It's kind of like a distancing tactic. It's kind of like these are a homogenous group of people who are all acting in one way for one reason, and that's not true. The people in Libya, they come from loads of different countries, loads of different backgrounds. They have loads of different former professions. They have loads of different skills. These are people like us. They're as varied as us and as complicated as us. And that's why these abuses are shocking, because they're happening to people who are like us, but obviously from slightly different places. But to treat it as a homogenous group is like saying that they're all the same, and that's not true. And once you realize that these are all, you know, as complex people as us, which sounds stupid, but so many times I've had to be like, these are people, you know. It makes it so shocking how many are dying, how many are being tortured. You know, nearly 30,000 now dead in the Mediterranean since 2014 that we know of, and those numbers are likely a huge underestimate. And yeah, the use of the word migrant, I don't know if I've explained that well enough, but it's like so in the book, basically, I was like, there's no way I can explain why every single person leaves their home, because all those reasons are different, you know, and there's no way that I can explain, you know, even why every different country, like what the issues are in every country. But yeah, I think that the one thing that people have in common, like when we say migrant crisis, what we should be saying is global inequality crisis. That's what we have, because probably the only thing that all those people have in common is that they can't access legal routes to safety, they can't access visas, they can't get on planes, and you know, a large portion of the world can't. And for us with privileged passports, you know, it's very hard to imagine what that is like, but that's the reality for a large portion of the world.
Bé, molt bé, jo espero que realment el llibre serveixi com un toc d'atenció important en els ambients europeus i especialment de la Unió Europea, que realment els països s'han tret una mica les puces de sobre, dient no, això ara és una competència de la Unió Europea, hem creat Frontex, etc. i preguntin a Brussel·les. Llavors hi ha aquí una manera de trobar excuses, però realment jo crec que és un testimoni tan vívid que jo crec que tindrà un impacte en els debats sobre aquesta matèria bé, ja i en els pròxims temps. I per això passo la paraula potser al Xavier Aragall perquè entableu aquest diàleg que hi ha entre experts posats en la matèria.
Yeah, thank you to you.
Okay.
Molt bé, gràcies. Doncs el que pretenem fer ara és que quan ens van proposar de presentar aquest llibre ens vam donar compte ràpidament que hi havia una oportunitat aquí de parlar més enllà del llibre en si mateix, sinó de periodisme en la Mediterrània, perquè ens presentaven una cosa molt interessant, que era les persones que estan retingudes a Líbia. És una cosa que sabíem, però el testimoni directe del que estava passant allà no ho teníem tan clar i hem dit, és feines com la seva que ens la fan arribar. En aquells moments sabíem de la feina que havia fet l'Anna Surinyach al reportatge de 5W d'Un mar de luto. També estava en marxa el programa de ràdio amb 8 capítols, El mar al mur, que també recomano d'escoltar, i plantejar una cosa que jo crec que és molt interessant, posar-les a parlar entre elles, perquè el primer que fan és aquest toc d'atenció de tant aquí està passant una cosa molt important, posem les persones davant, és a dir, això està passant a persones. I llavors m'agradaria això, que a veure si intentem que surti bé, però és reflexionar una mica de la professió de fer periodisme avui en dia amb aquestes coses que estan passant, retinguts a Líbia, gent que està creuant el Mediterrani i que s'ofega, i més enllà d'això elles plantegen d'entrada, això ara us ho comento i a veure qui comença de les dues, el que us he comentat abans, feu una mirada àmplia i de llarg recorregut, és a dir, parleu de les persones, però aneu a l'origen d'aquestes persones, d'on surten, abans d'arribar a Líbia, abans de creuar el mar, però després també aneu allà on van marxar, què ha passat. El buit que han deixat, parleu amb les famílies, etc. Aquesta experiència, com l'heu viscut? Heu cregut necessari realment, perquè heu coincidit amb el mateix, és a dir, he parlat de com l'abans d'arribar allà, el que va passar allà, però també he tornat a parlar amb les famílies i donar un pas més a la dimensió humana aquesta que hi ha. Començo?
Maybe, jo.
Ja m'ho dius.
Sí, ara...
Sí, ara.
Bueno, primer de tot, gràcies per convidar-me. A mi m'agradaria estar allà escoltant a la Sally eternament. Crec que, bueno, ja li he dit a ella, però crec que la investigació que ha fet la Sally com l'ha fet és molt important que hagi sortit. I s'havia parlat de tortures als centres de detenció o als camps de concentració a Líbia, però no amb la profunditat que es fa en aquest llibre. Per tant, congratulations. Jo crec que sobre el que plantejaves, crec que l'única manera de poder aprofundir en els temes migratoris és fer ja recorregut, perquè si no ens quedem amb titulars. Les persones migrants són un dels col·lectius més estigmatitzats ara mateix i veiem com les polítiques europees van en una regressió accelerada. Vull dir, estem al 2024 a un punt que jo almenys el 2014, quan vaig començar a treballar en temes migratoris a Europa més centrats en la Mediterrània, per mi era impensable. Llavors l'única arma que tenim com a periodistes crec que és intentar no estar amb la voràgina informativa de l'actualitat, fer 2 passos enrere i plantejar històries que ens porten anys documentar. En el meu cas parlaves de Mar de Luto, que és un projecte que, igual que la Sally, mai se sap quan comencen aquests projectes perquè són tan llargs i et vas enredant i vas buscant respostes a preguntes que et van sortint, però sí que és un projecte que jo vaig començar a plantejar-me seriament fer el 2017. És un projecte que ara us ensenyaré una mostra de 3 minuts, molt curtet, que bàsicament poso el focus en les persones desaparegudes al mar. Què passa amb aquestes persones, sobretot qui les busca, si és que les busquen, que ja us dic la resposta, la podeu saber, i és que ningú les busca. I què passa amb les famílies i què passa amb aquests dols. Què passa quan una persona desapareix al mar? No és només la mort d'aquesta persona, sinó és l'espera eterna. L'Helena Maleno, que és una activista que lluita molt per això, sempre diu que la desaparició és el pitjor delicte, perquè sempre va rodejat d'una incertesa que mai se soluciona, i això és una mica el que jo he anat trobant durant el procés d'investigació d'aquest projecte. Llavors, el 2017 jo portava ja 3 anys treballant amb vaixells de rescat al Mediterrani. És evident que s'ha de fotografiar, ara parlava amb el meu llenguatge, acostuma a ser la fotografia, tot i que cada vegada és més també hi ha fotografia, però utilitzo molts altres llenguatges. El 2017 jo portava 3 anys fotografiant els rescats al Mediterrani, crec que és important seguir-ho fent, però estàvem ja massa acostumades a veure aquest mateix tipus d'imatges. Si pensem en rescats al Mediterrani i us faig dibuixar una imatge, segurament s'assemblaran moltes. I quan el 2015 veiem una embarcació amb gent morta a l'embarcació, això obria informatius, es publicava a les portades del diari. El 2017 jo vaig estar en aquell moment amb Open Arms, una ONG catalana que rescata el Mediterrani. Vam trobar una embarcació amb 12 persones mortes dins. En aquella embarcació hi viatjava la Sara Traoré, que havia sortit de Líbia amb la seva mare i el seu germà, i una de les persones mortes a l'embarcació era la seva mare i el seu germà havia caigut al fons del mar. Vam fer molts esforços per veure si el germà estava contemplat alguna de les estadístiques, si algú havia comptat la desaparició del germà. No ho vam poder saber mai, però aquell dia vam veure que havíem de fer alguna cosa, que havíem de parlar dels desapareguts des d'una altra manera, perquè evidentment les imatges de la gent morta a la pastera no només no van obrir informatius, sinó que van ser censurades a totes les xarxes socials perquè sortia gent despullada. Llavors eren imatges que no es podien difondre per xarxes. Llavors va ser en aquell punt, tothom té un punt d'inflexió, suposo que per la Sally va ser aquell missatge que rep per Facebook, doncs per mi va ser la mort del germà i de la mare també, de la Sara Traoré, el que em va fer començar a pensar com podem plantejar un projecte sobre desapareguts al mar. I ara estem al 2024 i per fi l'he pogut presentar i no l'he acabat, però ara sí que hem fet una primera part que sí que que podem presentar, si vols ensenyem.
¿Por qué damos los datos? Porque existen, porque están ahí, porque tal vez en este lado de la frontera nadie los tenga y nadie los cuente, pero al otro lado hay miles de familias buscando y al otro lado hay miles de personas que pertenecen a la diáspora migratoria que saben quiénes faltan y quiénes han desaparecido.
Kamu atau organnya tek sote sendok tek meba mengadap dulu tentang kalau please male ba jangan bah denga ba siorek lagu ho
moom naa yaakaar gisuma ko dégguma ko waaw metti na loolu.
moom de bu mu demee ñu jox yëpp ni si dara man de dañ maa war a ñu ne ma Lamine ñu ne seen gaal bi moo réer.
On costava molt posar rostre a gent que ha desaparegut. Llavors, per fer-lo, el que vaig fer és utilitzar les imatges que les famílies utilitzen per buscar les persones desaparegudes al mar, imprimir-les amb lona, aprendre a bussejar, que no en sabia, i posar-les a les aigües on aquesta gent ha desaparegut. Una mica també... Jo tenia molta por què passaria quan les famílies veiessin aquestes imatges dels seus familiars enfonsats literalment al mar i la reacció de les famílies ha sigut... Hi ha algunes famílies, mares sobretot, a les quals el germà encara no s'ha atrevit a ensenyar-los, però les que ho han vist ha sigut com una manera de... allò que es veu és el que... Quan es veu una cosa es fa més real i per algunes famílies el feedback ha sigut una manera com d'intentar assumir aquesta realitat. I és la manera que hem trobat per poder parlar d'això.
Sally, en el teu cas, això que deia, d'aquesta mirada de llarg recorregut et fa saber com era la vida abans d'arribar en el camp de Líbia. També has pogut fer una mica de seguiment després, no? Seguim amb la importància del relat de posar la persona davant.
Yeah, I obviously never imagined that this was going to take up so many years of my life, but at this point I've met people who I was in touch with in Libya initially for a year or even 2 years before meeting them. I finally got to meet many of them. Some of them are in Europe now, some are in other African countries. Some remain in Libya and I haven't been able to go there. Even in Tunisia, when I was there, I met some people who I had been in communication with when they were in Libya. And yeah, getting to meet people, to meet also the really sad thing actually about doing this type of reporting as a European or someone with a powerful passport is I can move around so freely when the people that I'm interviewing can't. And so I've met family members, sometimes multiple family members in different countries of people who I was in touch with in Libya when they can't meet each other. So they might not have seen each other for years and years, and I've traveled between, and even if I'm in the country for another reason, I'll call in on people. Sometimes I've brought presents from a mother to her child who's in a different country. And that's obviously, it's great to have those connections, but it's very sad in a way that that's the way things are. I will say, just because maybe it's of interest to people, and I was thinking when you were saying there, for me, covering migration journeys, it's not I've tried not to focus my reporting on just covering individual people's journeys, because I am always trying to see where I can add value. And for me, the value that I can add is it's to be found often by speaking to refugees, migrants, people making these journeys. Often when you ask them what is missing in knowledge, or what isn't being revealed, or what isn't being investigated, what they will say is something different to what you could imagine. And some of my big investigations on migration have been, for example, into corruption in the UN Refugee Agency in Sudan, the resettlement program, or I did an investigation into what happens to Syrian refugees who try to return back to Syria, that ended up being used in various legal challenges around Europe, because we revealed that people were getting tortured when they returned. And they've come from having these long-term relationships, but not necessarily covering their stories, but just saying, if there's ever anything you think we should be covering, just get in touch with me and tell me. Because, yeah, I feel like having those lines of communication are so valuable. You never know where that's going to lead you. And at the same stage, sometimes it leads you in ways that you kind of wish you hadn't really got involved in a way. But, you can't obviously say no. If something is really important, you have to cover it.
Sí,
and can I just add, that was very powerful, by the way. That's, very moving.
És això, no? Vinculat amb el que m'estaves dient, Sally, i el que hem vist en el llibre on menciones, i tu ara, Anna, quan explicaves la relació amb els familiars, no? Les dificultats que es pot tenir fent periodisme amb aquest vincle emocional que desenvolupeu, no? Amb el que esteu informant, coneixeu les persones, etc. Això d'alguna manera us afecta durant i després. Jo crec que la Sally en el llibre ho posa, no? Que després ha quedat molt tocada i quan estava altre cop a casa tenia un sentiment bastant dur del que ha fet. Això us passa?
Sí, bueno, em sembla molt interessant això que deia la Sally, no? Que al final quan parlem de fenòmens migratoris moltes vegades ens quedem amb una història concreta que intentes explicar la seva ruta, i al final el que s'ha de fer, evidentment, és buscar històries i seguir històries, però per explicar fenòmens més grans. I per això jo vaig intentar fer desapareguts, i ara vaig a la teva resposta, perquè al final també nosaltres com a europees, a part que ens podem moure lliurement, hem d'exigir responsabilitats als nostres governs, ja sigui el govern espanyol, si el català tingués més poder de decisió en això també, però a l'espanyol o a Europa. I el que a mi em passava, el que m'ha passat amb aquest projecte és que jo vaig començar a parlar de desapareguts perquè, com veieu en el vídeo, des de 2014, que és des de quan es compten la gent desapareguda, desapareixen cada dia sense parar, de mitjana, 9 persones al dia. Són xifres de guerra, traient Gaza, que és una cosa... Són xifres de guerra però que passen a les portes d'Europa i de les quals ningú se'n responsabilitza. Llavors jo quan vaig començar aquest projecte era per buscar responsabilitats, per saber si algú seria capaç de responsabilitzar-se de totes aquestes morts. I evidentment durant els anys que hem estat investigant això, que ho deies al principi, hi ha un podcast amb Catalunya Ràdio, part d'aquests projectes, que una cosa que tenen aquests projectes és que són molt cars i per això tampoc se'n fan tants, i part d'aquest projecte a mi l'ha finançat Catalunya Ràdio fent aquesta investigació, però quan hem acabat aquest projecte, jo, que no fa gaire, jo tinc un sentiment que estic molt enfadada. Jo em noto molt enfadada i em noto que hi ha vegades que dic no, ja prou, documentaré des d'una altra manera, narraré des d'una altra manera, perquè està clar que documentar així, narrar així, no acaba de tenir resultats, perquè cada cop que hem demanat als responsables, a gent que té responsabilitats a la Unió Europea o al govern espanyol sobre què passa amb els desapareguts al mar, no és només que ens hagin respost amb coses generalitzades, és que ens han dit literalment aquest tema ara no és prioritari. Llavors m'agrada molt com la Sally acaba el llibre i això quan el llegia he pensat, ostres, mira, és una possible resposta, ho llegiré en castellà per no traduir-ho malament, però al principi d'este libro escribí que esperava que tuviera algún efecto en la búsqueda de responsabilidades, que es just el que yo buscaba amb això, Ahora quiero que las personas que lo lean se cuestionen de manera más activa el mundo en el que vivimos, a quién se escucha, a quién se protege, a quién tiene acceso a la justicia, quién tiene empatía. Podemos hacerlo mejor, debemos hacerlo mejor. Si al final es, ya que las responsabilitats polítiques no sabem si les assumirà algú, almenys posar sobre la taula les qüestions necessàries perquè la ciutadania, com deia la Sally també al principi, sigui conscient del que s'està fent realment i què significa que les operacions del rescat al Mediterrani s'hagin complicat de la manera com s'han complicat. Llavors, sí, quan fas aquest reportatge tens un pes emocional molt fort, però aquest pes emocional jo crec que ha de servir per seguir denunciant i seguir produint llibres així o fotografies o en el llenguatge que sigui, però seguir explicant les coses que passen.
Sally?
Sorry, what was the original question? Do you want me to...
El que he dit abans, en la reflexió aquesta sobre el vincle emocional que desenvolupeu durant tot el període de temps que esteu treballant això, com us afecta això, tant a l'hora de fer periodisme en si mateix com després a nivell personal?
Yeah, okay, maybe I can answer more Anna, what Anna was talking about. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about my own emotions, but to be honest, I find it kind of irrelevant sometimes because I feel like, again, it's like a refocus on kind of like a white person rather than, the much broader issues. And yeah, like people, I used to, again, answer this differently when people ask me about the book. They'd say like, are you traumatized? And I'd be like, don't ask me that. And then later I'd be like, yeah, of course I'm traumatized, but like everybody in this entire book is traumatized. Like it's not very obvious. So I think that, this is trauma that we're putting people through. And imagine trying to live afterwards with that, you know, then people get to Europe and we say, you need to integrate. And it's like, do you know what these people have been through? And do you know what you're now forcing them to basically shut up about so that they can try and fit into your way of life, when your way of life is one of, you know, and I'm not saying people don't suffer in Europe, but it's like, you know, it's very hard for people, I think, you know, people I interview in the book, for example, who I met in Sweden, who had been in a detention center where someone was dying on average every fortnight. They got to Sweden and they said it's so difficult to see how people here treat their pets, because they treat their pets in such a loving way and they're pampered and they're so well fed, and it's like they don't know how people are being treated on the borders. And yeah, to go back to what Anna was saying in terms of you know, whether you have hope that things will change and why you do this work. I mean, it's been very interesting for me. One thing I didn't anticipate from my work is that actually it can be used quite a lot in like legal challenges, or even like the EU itself. People were doing kind of evaluations of their funding and they started using my work as kind of reference points. And I know that because they reached out to me about the Libya work. And it's kind of a bit strange because as a journalist, I don't know how much you're not really meant to be involved in legal processes and stuff. So I did actually, one chapter of the book is about Rwanda, and I was asked to submit like an expert statement for the challenge against the Rwanda deportations in the UK, the challenge against the Home Office. And I did do that because it was basically just writing out my reporting and then signing it. So I was like, okay, as a journalist, I feel like I'm allowed to do that. And that was used in that legal case. The book itself has been cited in a submission to the International Criminal Court calling for named European officials to be investigated for crimes against humanity. And also I know that the book and my reporting has been used by prosecutors who are taking cases against specific human smugglers who are again mentioned in the book. And so that's been quite interesting, and potentially some of that will yield some results. I mean, I know the Rwanda challenge actually, it was ruled illegal in the UK, but I'm not sure if my reporting played any role in that eventually. But in terms of that, I didn't anticipate that, and that is something that's happening. But I'm like, as a journalist, you can never predict consequences, and you actually can't do your reporting hoping that there'll be impact or consequences. And I was very strangely, I've kind of been more embraced by the EU recently, and I was asked to speak in the European Parliament in November, and I was actually asked to go back again and speak at a European Commission event in March, which I'm not able to do. But in the speech in November, I said, you know, I used to think basically like that you needed to have hope that something will change, and now I've come to the conclusion that you don't need to have hope to stand on the right side of history. Like, that's not the reason to do the right thing. And yeah, I guess yeah, we just need to, you know, I'm tired of people saying, do I have hope? I probably don't have hope, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to say what I think is wrong about what's happening.
Estic d'acord.
No, sí, evidentment, per nosaltres, per exemple, des d'aquí, que nosaltres el que fem és d'observatori i treballem amb el que és l'anàlisi del que passa, aquesta feina que fa vosaltres ens fa obrir els ulls de la magnitud del que realment està passant, perquè al final llegeix anàlisis, llegeix informes, i a vegades es dona per descomptat que el tema és secundari i quan veus la profunditat de la qüestió t'esgarrifes. Jo crec que sí que un dels propòsits o un dels impactes rellevants que té és que almenys ens fa posar sobre la taula aquest impacte moral de dir què està passant i com és que no hi ha una reacció cap a això. Jo crec que això s'aconsegueix bastant en aquest sentit. Però voldria seguir amb el tema de fer periodisme en aquests temes I l'altre, que és bastant obvi, però jo crec que també estaria bé reflexionar una mica, i com a eina, que és en el cas de la Sally especialment, que és les xarxes socials. Ella no ha pogut anar directament als camps de detenció perquè per la seva seguretat era millor no anar-hi, i és molt difícil, molt complex, però sí que gràcies a un ús de les xarxes socials ha pogut documentar-se bé i ha pogut assegurar-se les coses. També en el cas del seguiment dels familiars, per intentar saber on són, també les xarxes socials són bastant importants i ha permès una mica això, que el periodisme pugui alimentar-se d'imatges i textos que la pròpia gent que està passant les coses us envia. Això com ho veieu vosaltres? És una forma exclusiva en aquest cas, o en aquest cas és més significativa, és més important perquè hi ha aquesta dimensió humana? Com ho voleu vosaltres, això?
El tema dels desapareguts al mar de luto, no hagués estat possible sense les xarxes socials ni sense les xarxes ciutadanes, perquè al final la tesi principal és que no hi ha una institució que responsabilitzi de tot això, per tant no hi ha ningú que estigui buscant aquestes persones, són només els familiars, i els familiars organitzats per diferents xarxes que els mateixos familiars han muntat en els països d'origen. Per tant, jo vaig localitzar aquests familiars que exerceixen una mica de líders a través de xarxes socials. La gent que lidera aquests grups munta grups entre els familiars de pasteres. Les imatges que veieu al vídeo, les últimes imatges, són d'una pastera, gent de la mateixa pastera, una pastera que va desaparèixer en ruta cap a Canàries. Els familiars tenien un grup de WhatsApp en els quals jo hi era dins i a partir d'aquí es creen les xarxes d'informació. Sense xarxes socials això per mi hagués sigut absolutament impossible. De fet, l'altre dia parlàvem amb uns quants periodistes, fotògrafs, que ens dediquem a temes migratoris, una mica des del pessimisme, dèiem quin sentit té, per què ho fem, per qui ho fem, com ho fem, qui ens escolta. I al final ens fèiem la pregunta de realment es vulneren més drets humans ara o és que ara, gràcies a totes les eines que tenim, ens n'adonem que se'n vulneren molts, però és que abans també se'n vulneraven i potser no érem tan conscients. Llavors, tornant a la teva pregunta, sense xarxes socials i tampoc sense xarxes socials les persones, les famílies d'aquestes persones desaparegudes podrien estar en contacte per crear un grup per exigir en la mesura del que poden als governs. De fet, la Sally deia que ha estat a Tunísia, les mares de Tunísia estan molt organitzades, dic les mares perquè són principals mares les que s'han organitzat i estan exigint coses al govern i responsabilitats al govern. I al Senegal això encara és un moviment molt incipient, però tot això s'organitza gràcies a les xarxes.
Me also comment on social media. My book again wouldn't be possible without social media. One thing that I found particularly handy for keeping in touch with people who are kind of doing migration journeys is Facebook, because certainly in Libya, and I think this is common elsewhere too, like people's phones often get confiscated, their SIM cards would get taken, the SIM card can even get shut down without notice. They lose all their numbers, but if you're Facebook friends with someone or you're connected at least through Messenger, it means that when they can log in to their account at some point in the future from some other place, suddenly they can reach you again. And so it's a very, very convenient way of staying in touch with people. There's obviously bad parts of it as well. Hopefully people here will read the book. It talks about how people in Libya are held for ransom, extorted, and sometimes the money for that ransom is then crowdfunded on Facebook, and that's good in a way because it can save their life, but there's also questions about whether the amounts demanded are being made higher and higher because the smugglers or the traffickers know that they can turn to Facebook. Sometimes they actually encourage them to do this. I think I don't know, like, yeah, I mean, like everything for me has been involved social media. I don't think as a journalist you should only report on social media. And, you know, I was a bit worried with this book that people would be like, oh, she's like a social media, she reports everything through social media, which is not true. You know, I go wherever I can. I always want to be in the place. I tried to get to Libya many times. They wouldn't give me a visa. Also, I was given warnings that my life was in danger by MI6 and the CIA, which also made me hesitant. But honestly, I still tried to go after that because I was like, I don't want people to not believe what's in the book because they say that I didn't go myself. But the issue that I found very quickly is that if you actually get to Libya, you get a visa, you manage to enter the detention center, which many journalists have. Everybody there is afraid to speak to you. There are certain things that they can't say. They know that if they get interviewed by you, they could get tortured later. So many times somebody would say, you know, I'd get a message and I'd be like, BBC, we're here today. Here's all the things we wanted to tell them, but we couldn't. And because I had this long-lasting relationship with many people inside detention, I had ways to triangulate a lot of information. I had other sources I could check it with. And sometimes I'd contact those journalists and say, look, I got this message. You might be interested in this. And it's just meant that I could get a lot more in-depth reporting than somebody going could. And it's not to say that it's not good to go. Of course, it's good to go, but it's good to be also aware that there's, you know, things that you might not see or you might not be able to access. And we all know cases of that. You know, I've been to, for example, regime-held Syria, where I have like a minder bringing me around who's saying, look, isn't everything wonderful here? And, you know, it's... These types of controlled situations are good in some ways, but again, they have their limitations. So, yeah, social media is another tool to be able to report.
Bueno, podríem estar parlant molt, però us vull donar la paraula a vosaltres, perquè segurament que podeu aprofitar per fer-los preguntes a les autores. Si teniu alguna pregunta, us passarem un micro. Espera't un moment que aneu a buscar el micro. Ara el porten.
Hi, Sally. Thank you very much for being here. I remember when your book came out first in 2022, it was interesting because I think it came out in the weeks in which the Russian and Ukraine war started, and the flows of Ukrainian refugees started coming to Europe. And I think for many people, some people thought that could bring in some way a new feeling of empathy in Europe for refugees in general, but at the end, in some way, it wasn't the case, and it caused the opposite. It caused the general hypocrisy to show it in general in the way two similar cases were being treated. Why do you think, in general, it's so hard for Europe or the European societies to connect or to feel that level of empathy that they felt in one case, in the Ukrainian case, to the constant case in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. And I think, I'm not sure if it's in the Spanish version, but in the English paperback, I did write an update where I mentioned that happened. Because, yeah, like you said, the book went to print right before the full-scale invasion started. And then when it came out, that had already began. And it's hard for me to say exactly why. I mean, obviously, there's probably lots of reasons. I know some people that who went through Libya, who I was in touch with, they said they felt it was racism pretty much. But obviously, there's probably geopolitical reasons as well. I think it's hard for me to speak like for Spanish, like I can't read Spanish, so or Catalan, so I don't know exactly what you get in our media, in your media, but certainly in Ireland, I think that we don't have an awareness of some of the crises that are happening elsewhere. Like, I actually did an event a while ago where somebody said, you know, there's 2 wars in the world at the moment. There's Gaza and there's Ukraine. And I was like, that's not true. You know, there's Sudan, obviously, which is approaching the 1st anniversary now. 10 million people displaced. Congo, 7 million displaced. You have Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and also like a devastating drought, which is said to be climate change related. Somalia doesn't really produce emissions like the rich world does, so that's related to us, and tens of thousands are said to have died in just 1 year as a result of that. Like, there's so many crises happening that I think there's just not awareness of. And yeah, again, I can't speak for Spain, but in Ireland, I think there's a very strange view sometimes of like Africa and Africans, and people don't really, sometimes it's a kind of distancing thing. Again, it's this idea of like, I don't know, they don't really understand, for some reason they just don't realize that pain there is pain. It's the same as the pain we feel, you know. And yeah, it's been difficult because I do feel like my speaking about this book has descended into just me being like, people are people everywhere, and that's a bit hard. But yeah, and one thing that it's important to say, obviously refugee is a legal status, you know, migrant is a descriptor, people are people, but a lot of the people in Libya would actually have a right to international protection if they can reach the territory of somewhere that would be safe and claim that right, but they need to get onto the territory first. There's not really a way for them to get there without that. And yeah, so it's not to say that the actual legal process wouldn't recognize them as refugees, but it's more like, yeah, there might not be that understanding more broadly that they would have that right. And I know that wasn't a comprehensive answer, by the way, but I'm asking the same question.
No, jo només mirava xifres i durant el 2018, que es parla de la gran crisi de refugiados en Espanya, no? Perquè Salvini tanca els ports a Itàlia, no calia ser un expert en migració gaire per saber que no pararia la migració, si no pararien les travesses per mar, sinó que viraria i va virar cap a Espanya. I no sé si recordeu totes les imatges que s'estan repetint a Canàries, però del port d'Algeciras bloquejat, el govern va deixar la gent bloquejada al port d'Algeciras. Aquell any, que per cert Espanya va pactar milionades amb Marroc a l'octubre, van arribar a Espanya prop de 65.000 persones per aquesta ruta. Els 2 primers mesos de la guerra d'Ucraïna van arribar al doble. I això és una gran notícia, perquè vol dir que el sistema espanyol està preparat per acollir, perquè en aquell moment no es va bloquejar res, es van tramitar les sol·licituds d'asil i no va haver-hi cap invasió ni cap problema de desordre públic ni res. Això és una gran notícia, però la notícia dolenta és que és una mostra més de que vivim en una societat racista, i jo crec que no hi ha altra resposta. Perquè encara que és veritat que la Sally està dient que no, que s'han de jugar la vida per arribar a Europa i que si arribessin a Europa tindrien estatus de refugiat, el 2022, just abans que esclatés la guerra d'Ucraïna, jo estava a Mòria, bueno, Mòria no, al nou Mòria, el camp aquest, el centre d'atenció que han fet ara a Lesbos, i allà jo estava entrevistant a famílies d'afganesos als quals els estaven rebutjant les sol·licituds d'asil. Dones afganeses viatjant soles a les quals també se'ls negava la sol·licitud d'asil. Vull dir que arribar a Europa no és una garantia absoluta de que la teva sol·licitud d'asil sigui tramitada positivament.
Hi ha alguna pregunta més? Sí, i tant.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I actually have 2 questions. One is related to photography and the other one is more related to the construction of narrative about the migration in the central Mediterranean route, but in general about the EU borders. So I'm studying a master's in migration studies here in Barcelona, and it's quite curious, like all the things that came out during your talk today, because we had a discussion yesterday in class actually about photography and the role that photography plays in generating empathy or fear. And we used some images from how the press was covering, for example, the refugees coming from Ukraine and the ones coming from Sub-Saharan Africa, especially with regards to Melilla and Ceuta, and how many times, like, in the ways these pictures are, like the pictures that the press wants to see are the ones where a lot of people are gathered, you can't recognize the faces, and if you can recognize the faces, they try to get like the angry faces so that they generate kind of fear in the people looking at the pictures. While we were looking at the pictures from Ukraine, we couldn't find like pictures where you could see like a whole group of people. The focus was more on individuals or smaller groups of people, and you could really see like from the light. And I know that photographers pay a lot on that, like the use of lights and shadows to make it like more touching in a sense and provoke empathy. And I wanted to know, like, from your point of view, Anna, working with photography throughout the years, like, what was your experience? How is it like for you portraying migration in the central Mediterranean route, and not just in the central Mediterranean routes, I think also in the Canary Islands? How is it for you, like, trying to create a counter narrative to the mainstream photography?
M'hagués encantat estar a la classe. Bueno, estic absolutament d'acord amb tu. Un dels problemes principals que hi ha amb això és l'accés. A part de l'editor, o sigui, perquè moltes vegades es puntualitza amb el fotògraf, no? I el problema aquí normalment és l'editor, no? És qui decideix quina foto va amb quin titular. Però a part d'això, sí que és veritat que, per exemple, jo quan he treballat a Canàries, de fet, una de les meves premisses ara mateix és no fotografiar més les arribades als ports, perquè per fotografiar les arribades als ports ens estan deixant a 200 metres de les persones, llavors això has d'utilitzar teleobjectius i provoques aquest tipus d'imatges que al final és el mateix. L'accés està determinant quin tipus d'imatges estem produint. Llavors tu com a fotògraf has de dir quin sentit té fer aquestes imatges, per què serveixen aquestes imatges. En el cas d'Ucraïna l'accés era absolut. Tu anaves a la frontera, era una frontera amable, o sigui, va sortir a la frontera d'Ucraïna, quan sortia la gent per Polònia hi havia pallassos, hi havia tot tipus de voluntariat. Jo porto 10 anys fent migració, els meus amics mai a la vida, si m'escolta algú, m'han trucat per dir-me, escolta, podem ficar un cotxe per anar a Melilla? No, però per anar a Ucraïna tots volien posar furgonetes. Llavors va ser una barreja de tot, del racisme nostre, generalitzat, de l'accés que tenien com a periodistes o com a fotògraf a fotografiar determinades situacions i després la responsabilitat de cada un. Una de les solucions que hem trobat nosaltres per sortir una mica d'això és muntar revista 5W, que així intentem donar una cara amable. Però no cal anar a Ucraïna, perquè si tu analitzes com es va tractar l'arribada de l'Aquarius als ports de València, quan al govern espanyol li interessava dir que eren el país d'acollida, les imatges que surten en aquelles portades, que són gent negra, surten abraçant-se als voluntaris, surten rient, surten feliços, surten ballant. 3 mesos després d'aquella arribada, les imatges eren a 200 metres. Vull dir que és tant problema de les dinàmiques periodístiques com de l'accés, o sigui, amb l'accés et manipulen i el govern, quan vol, ens manipula com vol. Llavors és una mica un mix de tot.
Yeah, maybe I could just add to that. I was also in Ukraine actually at Christmas, and I've done photography I do photography as well with my journalism, not as good as yours. But another thing I would say is like it's also anticipation of the welcome in terms of the people who are crossing. Like Ukrainians knew they had a right to cross. They knew how they would be treated when they got there. They knew that they were getting welcomed, whereas people who arrive across the Mediterranean, of course, they've both been through absolute horrors in terms of torture and abuse often, but also they don't know how they're going to be received, and they probably are quite aware that they're about to enter into another kind of quite antagonistic and maybe frightening period. And so I think, you know, even when you say the faces they make, it's like probably that's also often the faces that the people are making. And also very often, and I know this also from being on rescue boats, people actually don't want their photo taken. They don't want their name taken. They know that they're about to enter again, very antagonistic asylum process that could use anything at all against them. If you're pictured, for example, on a boat trying to cross the Mediterranean and you're near you know this better than me probably, but you're near the engine or the steering part, that photo can be actually used against you as evidence to lock you up. And so I think that also creates a big, you know, when you get those big group photos, sometimes it's also because the faces aren't identifiable, and that's exactly why we as journalists feel okay to publish it, because we know that that couldn't be used against somebody on that boat. Or, you know, I often will get the back of a head or the back of a group of people, or, yeah, some way of making sure that those people aren't identifiable. Whereas Ukrainians, I think we're like, you know, much, not everyone I'm sure, but like much happier to be identified. They don't have that fear.
Gràcies. Ja podem recollir alguna última pregunta i així anem concloent l'acte.
I actually
La segona?
Yeah, I had a second one. This one is more about the coverage of the borders of the EU. And I'm from Italy, and what I see in the media is like this narrative of a crisis at our borders, but as Sally said, it's not about a migration crisis, it's more about a global inequality crisis. But then the mainstream narrative, again, is about this regime of exceptionality, and we have to defend our borders. And in a way, this is like legitimizing any type of measures. And so I found interesting what you said about accountability, about who is responsible. And one of the thoughts I've had with my colleagues from the Masters also, stemming from the conversations yesterday, was about, can we hold accountable the European Union or the European Union institutions for not acting to prevent this kind of narratives from being reproduced? Because we came to a point where it is obvious that people are losing their lives, and we can't, like, we have facts in front of us, we cannot keep like reproducing this mainstream narrative of crisis and border defense and above anything else. So, like, our thought was about how can we hold the European institutions accountable when we have the facts and we have the images and we have reports from many, many, many journalists and photojournalists.
I mean, I can't answer that because I guess that's what I was trying to do for the last 6 years. And the more that you get involved with it, the more you realize you're entering a big maze. That's not to say that, again, it's hopeless. Like, we shouldn't think about hope or hopelessness, but I find it very confusing. I went to the European Parliament like in 2018 twice, and I met a lot of MEPs. At that time, that was when my reporting was first getting attention, and the MEPs would be like, we try and ask the Commission stuff and they just don't answer, or like after 3 months they'll give us kind of some vague answers and we'll have to ask again and again, they won't answer. And people, like, people who work for the various, it seems to be that like nobody really knows exactly who's making certain decisions. And obviously I've met, like I did in November when I was there, I met one of the very senior EU Commission people who was saying, again, well, what can we do? This is what the public want. And so, yeah, it's quite frustrating. I do think they listen to public opinion. I think it's very worth noting that the European Parliament is actually at odds with the Commission right now, that the European Parliament passed a resolution in, I forget the exact month, but last summer, I think it was June or July, calling for search and rescue, European-led search and rescue to be reinstated, and also in the Mediterranean. And also I think it said they wanted provisions that the Libyan Coast Guard, if they're receiving support, would respect fundamental rights. But that resolution was non-binding. So it actually got reported, certainly in Irish media, as like, yay, like, isn't this so great, they've passed this resolution, but like a lot of people seem to fail to notice that it was non-binding, and the Commission is at odds with them because the Commission kind of went, well, we're just not going to do that. And the same thing was seen with the new Tunisia deal. I don't know how much you followed it, but it's kind of a similar, spending a load of money. Kais Saied in Tunisia is like an authoritarian. Increasingly, he's not officially a dictator or anything, but again, it's like a kind of deal that could encourage repression. And again, it's the Commission that's at odds with certainly Ursula von der Leyen is at odds with the Parliament, and they've been questioning whether she had the authority to do that at all. And I think with the elections coming up, things are a bit up in the air, because the Commission, from the people that I've spoken to, seem to be predicting that it's going to go more far right, and that's what they kind of don't want. And at the same stage at the moment, if they have one that's not far right, but they're not listening to what they say, like, I don't know, there's some issues going on there, but I guess things are going to become more clear after this election, and I guess everybody voting in the election could make some sort of difference. And the other thing, sorry, that I'll say very quick, my book came out in Italy in September, and I was there twice, and I had been very worried about the reaction, and I was actually like met so many amazing people, amazing journalists, people who came to events who all said, like, no, we think this is wrong as well. I also met politicians, Matteo Renzi, if you know him, who said that he also thinks that this is bad, and he's the former prime minister. People tell me, like, take that maybe with a pinch of salt. I don't really fully know the history of him, but yeah, I do think, we paint these countries as being like everybody supports one thing, but there's actually a lot more dissent than you might think. But yeah, sorry, that was long.
Doncs deixaríem aquí. Agrair a les dues per aquest debat que hem tingut. Jo crec que sí que serveix molt, perquè no deixem estar l'articulació entre el nord i el sud. Aquests fluxos migratoris aniran prenent diferents característiques, però seguiran segurament, i sí que aquesta feina la tindrem molt present a l'hora d'analitzar sobretot les polítiques que s'estan fent, la dimensió ètica. Ja sabem que les eleccions que venen al juny seran complicades, que hi ha un vot de dreta i d'extrema dreta que força una agenda i una narrativa, etc. Però almenys es pot convèncer a certs votants que no hi vagin a votar, d'alguna manera. Però alhora hem de tenir en ment que quan analitzem el nou pacte per la política migratòria, perquè hi haurà una part important d'externalització del control de fronteres, etc., que és on estan elles estudiant, i allà sí que hem de tenir aquesta responsabilitat de dir, tenir en ment això, aquest llibre i aquestes imatges, tenir en ment perquè no podem empitjorar la situació actual, i tal com està escrit hi ha un risc elevat que empitjori la situació actual perquè aquests camps de detenció es puguin ampliar a altres països. Per tant, moltes gràcies. És molt útil, evidentment, almenys en rebre-ho la ciutadania en general, però també els que ens dediquem a analitzar això, perquè tenim aquest punt crític que després l'hem d'elevar a mig camí pels decisors polítics que ens han d'escoltar, presumptament. Moltes gràcies i moltes gràcies a vosaltres també i seguirem amb temes migratoris.
I gràcies a l'editorial també per haver-ho traduït.
Sí.
Sí, la Sally, si voleu comprar un llibre i us el signi, doncs us signaran llibres aquí fora.
Can I be the first one?